People often say that if you meet someone who served in Vietnam, you should thank them for their service. But as it turns out, many of these veterans were very reluctant to talk about their experience. They were so ashamed for what they had done there, that they even tried to hide from others that they had been to war. It wasn't until decades later that they started opening up about their time spent in Vietnam. One such veteran was a man named Pete. He was a private first class when he fought in the Vietnam War, but no one knew he was there until 23 years after he came home, and what he did next shocked everyone. Pete grew up in a small town in North Dakota. In fact, his hometown was so tiny that it didn't even have a stoplight. So when Pete finished high school, he left town and joined the army. At the time, Pete wanted to be a military policeman, but his commanding officers had other plans for him. They sent him to basic training and then sent him straight to Vietnam. When Pete arrived in Vietnam, he learned that he would be serving under Captain Ray Cross, a man with quite a reputation. As it turned out, this captain was a real jerk. He treated his men like garbage and would yell at them for no reason. One day, he made Pete run laps, because he thought the soldier needed to get in shape. However, Pete had already been running all morning, so he just collapsed right in front of him. The captain simply told him to keep going, but this proved to be a fatal mistake. Pete's heart stopped beating right there. But luckily, another soldier stepped in and saved his life. As you can imagine, when something like this happened, the soldiers weren't very happy with their commander. But before they could do anything, he would always threaten them with punishment. "If any of you idiots complain about me, I'll have you shipped off to work with the engineers," he would say. Well, as it turned out, not even he could save himself. A few weeks later, he angered some of the locals and they set his house on fire. The captain got out safely though, while the rest of his belongings burned down. And this wasn't the only difficult situation Pete found himself in. During the war, he met a girl named Mai. She worked at a local orphanage, and quickly became friends with the soldiers. They would visit her every weekend, and play cards and checkers. This was the only thing that made the war more bearable for Pete, but it soon came to an end. The US wanted to withdraw from the war, so the soldiers had to return home. At first, Pete was very happy about this. Finally, he could go back to his family and forget about the war. But then he saw Mai at the airport. She was crying and holding a baby. Turns out she was pregnant when the soldiers left, and now she didn't know what to do. But none of the GIs could stay. They all had orders to go home, so Pete promised her he'd come back for her. Well, as you might have guessed, the US completely forgot about Vietnam once they withdrew. They didn't help Mai or any of the other Vietnamese people. They just pulled out and left them all behind. When Pete returned home, no one even asked him about his experiences in Vietnam, so he kept it all inside. Pete visited Mai several times over the next 2 decades. They got married and had a son together. He also became a father figure to Mai's younger brother, whom she had taken care of since their parents died. But he still couldn't tell anyone about his experience in Vietnam. In fact, he even destroyed most of his military documents so nobody would find out. Then one day, Pete's son, Justin, found his dad's medals. Of course, Pete was furious, but Justin didn't understand why his dad was so upset. All he saw were shiny medals and a whole bunch of ribbons. "What are these?" he asked. Pete hesitated, but then decided to finally open up to his son about his time in Vietnam. He showed Justin photos of him and the other soldiers, and even told him about Mai and the kids. This conversation changed Pete a lot. For the first time in 23 years, he felt like he could breathe a little easier, but he still didn't feel ready to share his story with the world. That is until one day while attending a veterans event. Pete was sitting in a crowd of former soldiers when he heard one of them talking about how great it was to finally receive recognition for their service. He had mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, he agreed that they deserved recognition. On the other hand, he thought that every vet had a different experience and some of them might not want to share their stories. Before he knew it though, the man was walking right up to him. "You were in Vietnam too, right? I heard you were pretty brave," he said. Pete nodded awkwardly, trying to avoid eye contact. He didn't want to talk about it. But the man didn't seem to notice, and continued speaking loudly about how they should all be honored for their service. At first, Pete felt uncomfortable, but then he realized something. Maybe it was time to move on and finally share his story. After all, he thought, there's no point in hiding it anymore. So Pete unfolded the flag he had kept in his pocket for over 23 years and pinned it to his shirt. "I was in Vietnam, yes, and I have the flag to prove it," he said. Everyone fell silent. Pete continued, "It doesn't matter whether we were in the military for 3 months or 3 years. If you were there, you were impacted by it." With that, Pete walked away. Everyone stared at the flag pinned to his shirt, and soon dozens of veterans did the same, each with their own stories to tell. Pete had never felt so proud to be a veteran. He had finally let go of his painful past and embraced his experience. "I think that's wonderful, Dad," Justin said to Pete after the event. "But why did you wait so long to tell me about your experiences?" Pete smiled. "I don't know, son. I guess I was afraid of what my friends and family would think. I mean, I was gone for 5 years. Do you really think they'd want to hear about all that?" Justin shook his head. "No, of course not, but I do. And I'm sure many other people do too." A few days later, a local newspaper published a photo of Pete and his flag. Soon, veterans from all over the country began reaching out to him. Some of them wanted advice, while others simply wanted to share their own stories. Pete replied to every letter and email, and soon he had thousands of stories to tell. He also began attending various events where he spoke to young people about his experience. "I don't want them to forget what happened in Vietnam," he says. Today, Pete is considered a hero by many. He's even received numerous medals and certificates of appreciation for his service. But he remains humble. "I was just doing my job," he says. "But I'm glad I was able to help bring attention to the Vietnam War and make sure those who served are never forgotten." Pete's story shows us that even the most painful experiences can be overcome with time and courage. It also reminds us to be grateful for those who serve in the military and the sacrifices they make for our freedom. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.